I'm going to get us started. Welcome, everyone. We will probably have some folks join us as we get going here. But welcome to this part two of our two-part series, Resilient Leadership. My name is Caron Daley. serve as the president of ACDA of Pennsylvania, and it is my distinct pleasure to have our guests with us today. Just to set the stage a little bit, I think we can all agree that we've been under some unique personal and environmental stressors since March, and that this has resulted in all kinds of challenges for our field, certainly for the world at large, and in particular in our field, as we consider our new roles in helping people stay safe and in preserving and protecting our jobs and in finding a sustainable path forward. So today we also look ahead with some optimism, hopefully, at the renewed energy our field has given to the fields of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and to the creativity and innovation that has resulted from the pandemic. Our guests today are Troy and Stephanie Robertson, and they come to us from Tarleton State University in Stephenville, Texas. So welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for having us.
Absolutely. And today's session is called Remember You, Take Care of the Leader. And we are going to be guided by Troy and Stephanie through some really awesome learning. As we go, please put questions in the chat box. I will be moderating that for us. And then we will have a dedicated time for questions at the end of today's session. So again, welcome, Troy and Stephanie, and over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. So it's great to be here with you. This session was actually born long before the pandemic began. Stephanie and I were interested in working together on something that has been very powerful sort of idea in our lives, which is the idea of taking care of ourselves even in the middle. Gosh, I'm going to fail at technology right away. Taking care of ourselves even in the midst of very trying times. And that was something that we were already very interested in, but of course it's made yet more relevant by our current circumstances. So you're going to hear from both of us, but I am a choral director, and that is it. And then you can see Stephanie has all of the letters rather behind her name. So she's the one with the real expertise and knowledge. So she'll chime in every once in a while with the real gold. So I'll start by saying thanks again for welcoming us. And then I think I will, I have one quick thing here to say, which is this is a hard thing to see, but it's something that really spoke to me when I saw it online. And this kind of frames my own attitude toward this session, which is this is often how it feels, that we're urged to work harder, and then it's very difficult to feel as if it really matters in the end. And that's one of the hardest things I think about the pandemic, is the struggle of teachers, conductors is very, very unique, and it is something that's very difficult to appreciate until you've tried to do it. And so I think this little sentiment that I saw come through my Facebook feed captures that very nicely. And now I think I'll turn it over to Stephanie.
Thank you, Troy. So as you mentioned, my name is Stephanie Robertson. I am a licensed psychologist and a licensed specialist in school psychology. I practice primarily with children right now. And so I work with the children from your choirs who have special needs in the schools. And then also I have a clinic, and this is where I am. I'm in my clinic today. When we created this presentation, we put this slide in, or this meme in, and we created it before the pandemic. Little did we know that it was going to become the theme of 2020, right? Sitting in the fire, this is fine. And we wanted to use this to sort of frame the presentation. So I want to talk to you about a video that I would normally show, and you can actually find it on YouTube if you're interested. And it's about sitting in a room on fire. So Latan and Darley, well, this is the video, but we don't have time to look at it, so I'm just going to describe it to you. They did a study back in the 1960s where they put people in a room and they put smoke up underneath the door. And that when they did it, when somebody was alone by themselves in the room, as this woman is, about 78% of people would immediately report the smoke coming in under the door. But when they put people in a room with what we call confederates in psychology, or people who are in on the game, 80% or so of people didn't report for up to like 10 minutes, and replication studies show people not reporting for up to 20 minutes if nobody else is reporting. So this sort of emphasizes to us how important the social psychology principle is of looking to see what other people are doing. And that's what we want to emphasize to you, is to talk about self-care and how important it is to be bold about self-care, to take care of yourself so that you can take care of other people. But sometimes we have to do it despite what the people around us are doing. We can watch people sit in a room on fire, or we can be bold and take action to take care of ourselves.
So this next slide shows some sayings that came to me over the course of my early career as a teacher, phrases that I heard a lot, and being the people pleaser that I am, and I know many of you are, I took them to heart. I thought, oh, well, okay, if it's dark to dark, then we're going to work dark to dark. Teaching is a calling. Don't teach for money, it's your passion. I'll sleep when I'm dead. I heard that one a lot. These kids need us. If not you, then who is something I heard a lot. Well, all of us, I think, have experienced, if we've been teaching for more than a month, that kids have a bottomless end. There's no end to their needs. They need everything we could possibly give them, and then much, much more. And then these were the roles that we gradually take on: high school choral director, musical director, weekly all-county chorus. We do fundraising, we do all state and region, we do, some of us, church jobs, children's chorus, we have handbells, and we have working with symphony choruses, all kinds of things. And then, of course, all this piles up into kind of a nightmare. And then again, this is sort of where I was early in my career. I thought, well, we're going to work really hard and I can do it all. But then it turns out that you got to do all this stuff over the course of a day. You got to sleep and eat and exercise, and you have to have some time with family, and you need to take some time off. All of that is important. So those were some early experiences of mine. And then Stephanie, as I said, is going to come in with some of the techniques and the terms to take care of those needs.
Absolutely. So let's define a few terms first. We've put in the dimensions of wellness because I do think that these are each really important components of self-care. So not only do we need to take care of our physical needs, eating healthy, sleeping, getting outside to exercise, but we also have to take care of ourselves socially. We have to take care of our occupation, our finances, our spiritual needs, our emotional needs. So in order to do this, we look toward work-life balance, which is technically defined as seeking balance between each of those 8 dimensions of wellness. So not putting too many irons in one of our fires, right? But really trying to sort of divide our time, our attention, our effort into each of those domains. In order to divide our time into each of those domains, we do follow boundaries. We have to establish and set boundaries for ourselves. And boundaries are those intentional limits that we establish to create healthy spaces, right? So that we can create opportunities to spend time with our families. We can intentionally create opportunities to work or to engage our spiritual lives. And what we've experienced with COVID especially, this was something that was a problem before COVID, but we're seeing it exponentially increasing now, is job creep, right? So increasing amounts of work with regard to typical job obligations, but then also the opportunity to engage with our jobs or not very intentionally actually, but across the day. So instead of it being bound by sort of a regular schedule, especially now that many of us are working from home, it's very, very difficult to create intentional separation between the things that we do to take care of our spiritual and intellectual and emotional needs and also our work needs, because it feels very pressing and very, very difficult to let go of the work needs and to take care of the other needs now when we're working from home. Okay.
So a lot of the language here is around teaching, and I think those of us who are conductors are also in the role of teacher in whatever we're doing. But I think that this slide in particular speaks to me right this minute, because we're in a situation where we don't know really what the spring is going to look like. We have all kinds of variables being thrown our way with regard to health and safety. Those have already been disrupting our lives for about 6 months now, and to suddenly have a drastic change in the spring is still on the table. And so it's important not to think in terms of today, this week, this month, but to think in terms of what can I do long term to take care of myself. And so we included here in our presentation a few stats on attrition rates. I've actually just been listening to a discussion of charter schools and attrition, where the teacher is given that message of dark to dark, and you've got to sacrifice yourself for these kids. And then of course attrition at charter schools, where that's the climate, is much higher even than in public schools. They quit at an alarming rate, and they constantly are having to hire new teachers because it's just not sustainable. So thinking of what is a sustainable model for my life, how can I hang on to my drive and my energy and my creativity? And so one of those ways is to take a look, especially here at the break in the seasons, to form new habits. And then we immediately, I think of the famous quotation that we are what we repeatedly do, which is sometimes I think attributed to Aristotle, but Will Durant is the person I found who's responsible for it. But how do we create those new habits? And both Stephanie and I talk about this, myself in my choral methods class, and she talks about it in her psychology class. And so I think she's going to go over some of the details of that. Oh, first she's going to talk about COVID-19.
So I do want to address a couple of things related to self-care in our era of pandemic. And so it's really important for us to look at the three pillars, right? If you think about the legs of a stool or a pyramid or some of the other things, to look at the three basic components for self-care. So we do have to look at making sure that we're focusing on healthy eating, getting outside, and obtaining adequate sleep. So if you have looked at the news lately, some of the things that we're finding that are the treatments for over-the-counter self-help kind of treatments for COVID are things like vitamin D, which we naturally used to get by being outside and getting exercise, and melatonin, which is related to adequate sleep. And so we're seeing that some of the things that COVID has done has sort of shined a light into those dark places where we're skimping on our healthcare, our self-care. So we do have to make sure that we're focusing on the basics. The American Psychological Association actually has some really good resources for COVID self-care. And so I would recommend looking at the APA's website. At the very top, there's a yellow bar and it says COVID resources, and it's available for the public. You don't have to be a member. And there are many articles and links and really valuable references there. But we talk a lot, and we've talked a lot, psychologists, since we've been in pandemic, about doing things that you have to incorporate sort of intentionally. So making sure that we're sticking to a routine, even when we're working from home, even if we're not able to do the regular things that we would normally do, making sure that you're packing a healthy lunch, you get up and you take your shower, you create a delineation for your work day that you would normally do. So we're creating sort of an artificial start to our work day, even though we're not leaving our homes. We have to protect against job creep by creating dedicated workspaces. And so, Troy has a dedicated workspace back in our guest bedroom, right? And so he always is back there, and that's where he does his work. I've created a dedicated workspace on our kitchen table, and that is where I do my work. And we have these dedicated workspaces so that we know that when we're in that space, we're working. When we're not in that space, we're trying to do some of the other things for self-care, like spend time with each other and spend time with our child. It's really important to stay connected. The most recent research that we're seeing has actually shown that people are not more lonely during this pandemic time. We're finding alternative ways to connect. And that's really kind of a landmark study, because what we believed was that we would be more lonely, we would be more isolated, and the quality of those connections may not be quite what it was before. And we have to engage with those things a lot more intentionally than we used to, but people seem to be at least rising to that challenge. Now, there are many other things that are not so great about what we're doing in COVID time, but that's one of the things that has been beneficial. Another really important component is to limit your news consumption. Dedicate only a little bit of time during the day, because we can doom scroll, right? Look through all of the terrible news that's happening over and over again. And so it's easy to fall into that trap, especially given all of the things that we're doing that are outside of COVID. So we have all of the bad news from COVID. There was all of the stress of the election. There's all of the stress of the social injustices that we're seeing across the nation. So we have to be intentional about limiting our news consumption. Be mindful of substance use. We have seen increased rates for alcoholism and substance abuse during COVID times. And then self-care and self-monitoring. So not only taking care of yourself, but checking in with yourself to make sure that you're okay, checking in with other people too. But if you're not okay, seeking help. So many of us psychologists and practitioners, counselors, have created full telehealth models because we do want to continue offering services. And the evidence is that telehealth is as effective as in-person counseling sessions. So if you're feeling overwhelmed or like you need help, please reach out to a counselor. And I talk more about how to do that a little bit later in the presentation. So we're going to talk about some real nuts and bolts of how to create change for yourself, how to create new habits. And the first thing that we're going to talk about comes from the behavior modification literature. In the schools, I call it BMOD. I create functional behavior assessments and BIPs all the time. But we're going to kind of boil it down to the very basics, right? So the very first thing that I would recommend doing if we're looking for behavior change is identify one behavior that you want to change right now. Not all of the behaviors you want to change, but one specific focused behavior that you're looking at. And the first thing you need to do is establish a baseline. You need to know how often you're drinking, or how much you're drinking, or how little you're sleeping, right? Or how little you're exercising. So you establish a baseline for that. You have to make sure that it's a measurable behavior that you're trying to change. And then I would encourage you to make graphs. Because what we know about behavior modification is that visible changes are highly motivating. So if you are able to track your change and you're able to see the improvements, that's actually something that will help you to remain engaged with your behavior modification strategies.
I want to stay on that for just a moment, just to say that I've found that as I've employed these strategies for myself, that's one of the most important moments, is to begin to really track what it is that I'm doing. And that in and of itself can be the intervention that I needed, because suddenly I realize, oh, I've already done that for this X amount of time today. I need to reduce the time I'm doing that, and then I can do it midstream. But as you're outlining your habit that you want to develop, one of the things we often forget is that we have this behavior we want to change, but there's not only a consequence to that behavior that we're going to give ourselves, there's also an antecedent. There's usually a precondition to that behavior, and modifying the antecedent can actually end up being something that works out better. So for example, for myself, I've been struggling with sleep because I'm, charged up all the way up until bedtime. And one of the things that I've decided to change here in the last 2 or 3 weeks is whatever is going on, I'm going to begin the bedtime routine at this X time, and I'm going to be in the bedroom laying down ready to go to sleep. And that has been helpful for me. It has led to more regular sleep, is to modify that antecedent behavior. And that has been good for me. Rewards are better at shaping behavior than punishments. And so you're already probably not feeling great about whatever habit it is you want to change. Further punishing yourself is probably not going to move you toward that goal. So some kind of reward for achieving goals rather than punishing yourself for not achieving them.
Okay. We want you to keep in mind that behavior modification does take time. So expect about 2 months to establish a new habit. The average is 66 days. There are some strategies that can also really help you to stick with the behavior change. So one is to find an accountability partner, because we know that social facilitation is very powerful. So we talked about that before with the room on fire. So people were socially facilitated to sit in a room that was potentially on fire. But social facilitation can also help us to engage in what we would call pro-social behaviors, or things that are really helpful for us. We know that extrinsic motivators often become intrinsic motivators. So I create a behavior plan or behavior modification assignment for my students, both in Introduction to Psychology and a Psychology of Adjustment class. And the feedback that I get from my students, not just one time, but many times, is that that behavior modification change plan that I make them do as a part of a class project becomes so intrinsically motivated that they continue doing it. I had a student who read a study that vitamin D or sunshine exposure helped with asthma. So she decided she would intentionally be outside for an hour a day, every single day. And it was so intrinsically motivating for her that by the time she graduated from college, she had gotten herself off of her asthma supportive medication. And that's not something that all people are able to do, but it's one of those success stories that make you feel really good because you've helped that person to create lasting change and to create meaningful change for themselves.
And just continuing there, we were going to cite a few examples we like. Out of my personal life, there are a couple things that I've done over the years that have been helpful. So the first time I encountered this concept, which was when Stephanie and I were in graduate school, I decided to begin exercising. And that was something that lasted for a long, long time. I probably had a going, I don't know, 10 or 11 years there where I really did not miss time running and in the gym, that sort of thing. COVID-19 has put a little bit of a damper on my ability to get to the gymnasium because I'm just not keen to get in there with a whole bunch of people. But it's something that was meaningful to me and did last. I mentioned already sleep. That's something that I found it to be extremely helpful with and also kind of quick to help with. Sleep is something I think all of us are sort of intrinsically motivated by, and so a plan to help your sleep can be easy to implement. Then of course diet. One of the fun examples I like to cite that I've had recounted to me is a student who wanted to meet a significant other, and so it's difficult to sort of quantify how are you going to get there, and this person decided it was eye contact and smiling that they were going to quantify, and so they would go sit in a well-traveled location with other students around and make eye contact and smile at people, and so they documented that as their quantifiable factor for their behavior modification. I'm sure Stephanie has many examples. She's got lots of students who've done this over the years.
Absolutely. I mean, I have had students who've reduced their candy intake, who've lost significant amounts of weight. Energy drinks are a big thing on college campuses. So helping my student or the students helping themselves really to pull back on the amount of like caffeine, sugar drink consumption has been really helpful and motivating. And then the other one that's a common and really popular is just exercise for my students, making sure that they get out and exercise. And probably at least 10% of the students that I have ongoing contact with, because I teach them usually in beginning psychology, which is the beginning of their freshman year, and then again in their senior capstone class. And so I've had students who've come back to me and said, I kept doing it. Like this was really wonderful for me. And so I get that feedback again in my capstone class that they've continued their behavior modification. So it really does become intrinsic. All right, and so let's talk a little bit about how we create goals that are meaningful and how we're going to implement these, right? And so one of the things that's really important as we're creating a plan for ourselves is to establish what we call SMART goals. And SMART is an acronym, and you've probably heard this before, but I just want to reemphasize it. SMART goals are goals that are specific, that are measurable, right? Because we want to track it, we want to be able to see it. We want our goals to be achievable, realistic, and trackable. So we want all of those components in our goals. And if you create something that's specific to a behavior, you will obtain that. But it's really also important to establish early wins. So when I create a behavior intervention plan for a young child who is really struggling in the classroom, for example, I structure it so that they earn rewards much more frequently early on than they do later on, right? Because we can fade those rewards over time once that intrinsic motivation becomes, that extrinsic motivation becomes intrinsic, but it's really important to give yourself opportunities for early wins. And so the picture is something that Troy and I tried last year, and we were going to do again this year, but we didn't do it, which was a race, the Spartan race. And so we had to do a lot of sort of reflection and engagement and self-care to do that, exercise and eating right.
I'm only pictured here because Stephanie's picture were vetoed. There's lots of good pictures of her as well. So
put air quotes around good there.
So where to apply your new superpower now that you have this method of intervention for yourself? What are you going to do with it? And I think for many of us, this is the place that is a constant source of stress in our lives, the little notifications that pop up in our email inbox. And so this is just an example of reducing stress. This also goes beyond the behavior modification example. One of the strategies I like is to consider something I call email bankruptcy. Actually, I don't call it that. It's a friend of mine who's a businessman. He introduced introduced me to this concept. He every January and then once in the summer, he looks at his email. He gets down to the last month or so. So he's now 4 or 5 weeks in the past, and he says, "All right, if I haven't gotten to it by then that means it must not be very important to me or to the people who are trying to get in touch with me." And he archives everything at that point. And so he essentially does a zero inbox by taking a realistic look at his email and saying, this is not going to happen, and getting down to zero. And that reduces the stress significantly. I can tell you from personal experience, because I do the same thing. Not only that, but it's made me better at maintaining email correspondence. I've gotten much, much better over the last 3 or 4 years as I've implemented this, because it encourages you to keep that email at zero. If you look at that email and it's at 5,000 every day, you don't have much incentive to keep it from 5,010. So it's a helpful thing. It's a really, sounds a little bit radical, but once you sort of think about it, it's like, well, actually, it's not really that big of a deal. Leave email for specific times of the day. If you're a person who has your notifications on at all times, maybe that's something that stresses you out. I do know people who feel that you should answer email within seconds. If that's you, then maybe this isn't for you. I personally don't feel that that's healthy, but if that's where you are, then maybe this is not for you. Let technology do some work for you. Color code, sort by importance, add flags, unclutter. Don't use it as your to-do list. Consider leaving it off your phone. Technology can really make our lives more convenient, but it can also steal our times from us in ways of which we are not even quite aware. And so another one of the things that you might consider is taking a day to do screen-free. We have at our house Screen-Free Sunday. That's something Stephanie started. It was her idea. How long ago was that? Maybe a year and a half? It's been at least...
I think it's actually been all of Winton's life. So 7 years.
Holy cow. Okay, I was way off. All right, so for 7 years now, we've had essentially screen-free Sundays at our house, and it's a really nice thing. Taking a movie night. I don't know about you, but I've found it harder as I've gotten well into the era of smartphones and tablets and that kind of thing, to just sit down and watch a movie without constantly looking at my phone. I still find that difficult, but to dedicate that time to watching the movie and have a little bit of a mental break. Another habit that we have developed together is to take time for gratitude. You may have heard this as an effective strategy, and it is incredibly effective. Just to think, both by yourself and also with anyone in your life, family, significant others, what is going well in your life? What is something for which you are very, very grateful at year's end? What were those major events? Your photos you take are a good way to sort of help remind yourself, your calendar, really being intentional, setting aside a day or two for this. And then we also take time, both individually and as a family, to say, what do we want to do better this year? What's something that we want to improve? And take a look at that behavior modification strategy. How could we actually implement a plan to move the ball down the field? Something that we had just started when we did this presentation, I think we had been doing it for a grand total of 3 months, but has now fallen by the wayside, was to have a monthly mission. Something we had heard about that sounded fun. And essentially, it was just a monthly goal, mostly just for fun, kind of as a family, and just some kind of like fitness goals or some family outing kind of goals. We gave them fun names. We had 100-mile march, so that was, we tried to go 100 miles in March, running and walking. Dinner and movie night for mom and dad. Going to bed, being a focus, meatless Mondays, all kinds of things to sort of enrich your life just a little bit. If all this planning sounds stressful, you don't have to do this all at once. Maybe pick one of these strategies. That's another element of that behavior modification idea, is to pick one thing, not 7 at the same time, to focus on. And this is the one you wanted to skip over, Sweets?
Yeah, we'll skip this one.
All right.
Just in the interest of time.
Yeah.
It was just about timing. Okay, so we do want to talk about one of the ways to prioritize your time, because the APA does recommend prioritizing time, is to find a strategy for doing it. And so one of the things I teach my students is to create a to-do list, but to create it in quadrants, right? And so in one quadrant, you put the urgent and important tasks, the things that you have to do by a deadline, and you have to get them done. In your next quadrant, you put not urgent, but important. So things that maybe are going to be required for you to do, like writing your 5-year plan, right? Or planning your curriculum for the spring or whatever. They're not urgent yet. They will be, but they're not right now, but they are important. So you can put them into that category. Urgent but not important are things that you feel pressured to do, but maybe that in the grand scheme of things, there are things that you can let go by the wayside. So maybe, writing a letter or, taking care of something. Then finally, not urgent and not important. These are the email dings, things that, especially if you have social media notifications on your phone, feel really important. There's more TikToks that I need to look at, or I've got to respond to this person on Facebook or whatever. They're not urgent and not important. So you create, some to-do things in that quadrant as well. And then you tackle intentionally by, what's going to be the thing that you have to do that's urgent and important. And then you work from there. But dividing your time in that way helps you to avoid those things that are time sucks, like doom scrolling or scrolling on social media endlessly or doing some of those things. So there are some other really practical, really accessible strategies that you can incorporate in order to sort of engage with self-care. One of the things is mindfulness and mindful self-compassion. And we're seeing more and more research come out on how very powerful mindfulness is. The problem with mindfulness as an intervention is that it is dose responsive. So if you stop engaging in mindfulness practices, you lose the benefits of mindfulness, especially meditation. So it's important to incorporate a practice and then to persist of that practice, because we do see physiological gains and psychological gains, reduced blood pressure, but also improved psychological well-being with things like mindful meditation. But when you discontinue it, you don't have the response anymore. Mindfulness is a deliberate practice of viewing your thoughts with curiosity rather than self-judgment or criticism. So a friend of mine talks about it as sort of like oven mitts. So you hold your feelings with oven mitts. You can look at them with curiosity and try to figure out what your emotions are trying to tell you. It's a practice that we cultivate in the same way we rehearse difficult pieces of music, so they're good when it matters in performance. We rehearse stillness and separation from our emotions so that we can engage mindfulness when we need it, during times of stress or in the point of performance. So there are two good apps for doing this. Calm is one, and it's one that you have to pay for, but Waking Up is one that Troy's used, and they're both sort of teaching you meditation skills. And so those are some good resources for that. Another mindfulness strategy that's really easy to incorporate that you can do right now and you could do anywhere is a 5-4-3-2-1 coping technique. I use this in counseling sessions. I use it fairly regularly. So in the 5-4-3-2-1 model, you acknowledge 5 things you can see around you, 4 things that you can touch, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing that you can taste. So in doing that, you're grounding yourself in the moment, in this moment, because so much of our lives are spent thinking about the future or ruminating or thinking about the past. And so what this does is this draws your attention to the present moment, and it helps to increase your presence and grounding. And so one of these cognitive strategies, and I think this is a great quote, and it's Eckhart Tolle. And so what a liberation to realize that the voice in my head is not who I am. Who am I then? I'm the one who sees that. This is a cognitive reframing. It's a cognitive restructuring. And so much of what we do in counseling is related to changing the way we think about our own thinking. Another way to change the way we think about our own thinking is by incorporating dialectics, right? So dialectics are 2 opposing thoughts or ideas that can coexist in our mind, right? So one idea is, because I failed at these things, I am a failure. Because I'm failing at maintaining work-life balance during a pandemic when our entire world has completely shifted around us, I'm a failure. The antithesis of that, the opposite idea, is making mistakes is not a big deal. I shouldn't care about it at all. Neither are very healthy, right? But you can synthesize those 2 ideas, hold 2 opposing ideas in your head by incorporating the and, right? So acknowledging and improving on my mistakes is important, and it doesn't diminish who I am as a person. So when you find yourself engaging in negative self-talk, which we all do, it's very, very normal. look for the and.
So one of the things that's sometimes difficult to see is what is in fact in your way. Why are you not able to find the balance you're looking for? And one of the things I have my students do is to go through, we mentioned sort of quantifying and then taking stock as an intervention. And so one of the things I have them do is to go through their entire week and diagram out where does their time in fact go? What are they spending their time on? And then just as a brief anecdote, I'll just mention for me, one of the most helpful things that happened in this regard in the last several years was I fell and broke 4 ribs. And that puts a damper on your plans for the next month or two when you're not able to get around very well. And it was about a week, or I guess 2 weeks, where I really had to just lay in a chair and not do much of anything. And that is not me. I am I am typically up and moving and working by 6 or 6:30, and I'm going all day long. And it was a forced stop to really take stock of what was going on in my life. And I would encourage you to explore other options for stopping to take a look at what's going on in your life, but just to do that, to really take stock of where you are and where you're spending your time. And then when I was thinking about that in particular, and then thinking about this presentation with regard to what's happening at the moment, there were several things that came to mind for me personally. And so the first was that I had this idea that we were going to do these virtual choir performances as our way of presenting to the community, because sure enough, we were unable to have anyone, even from outside our building, come to our concerts. We couldn't have even non-music students or staff. So how are we going to show people what we've been doing? Well, we're going to do these virtual choir things. Well, I had this plan of having all these draft recordings, and I have 5 ensembles. And with that many ensembles, that was unwieldy, to say the least. It was too much. And so that was a point where I had to say, you know what, this was not a good plan. This is in the way of me connecting with my students, of me getting my job done. We are going to abandon this plan. Example number 2 for me from this semester is about, I would say, halfway through the semester, I had to take a hard look in the mirror and say, you have planned too much repertoire. You have done too much this semester. Next semester, you're going to have to back off. So even though I had done slightly less repertoire than I normally would, it was still way too much. And so as we're looking at next semester and talking to my students and seeing where they are, that's something I'm going to have to pull back on, because it's stuff that's getting in the way of that balance that we're seeking to achieve between home life, work life. At work, where are we devoting our attention? Am I spending all of my time doing one task that is not in fact my entire job? And so these two things were kind of getting in my way. And I hope you'll think about this question, so that in the Q&A chunk we can share just a little bit. What's your experience been? What has happened this fall? I'm going to give another presentation on Monday, or be part of another presentation, to talk about what is going well, what has not gone as well, in terms of how you've been spending your time this semester. And then another big question is, many times when we're thinking like, what is best for me to do right now? What is the thing that I need to focus on? What is the thing that I need to be doing? All of those are about me. What do I need? What should I be focusing on? What is the most important thing for me? And I think all of us know that we are a very important factor in our ensemble in our classroom, but we are not our ensemble. We are not our classroom. Our ensembles do not consist of empty chairs. It's the people in those chairs and the people standing in front of us. And what do they need? And we could make a list, but in the interest of time, I've sort of gotten us started here of aesthetics. People want to know skills and knowledge. They're certainly paying for that if they're in a college or they're at our public school. For excellence, they want to be part of something really great. And then I think for a lot of them, social connection. That is my bias, is that most of what we love about music has to do with the social, probably 80% of it, I would say. And that has been the place that has been the weakest link, of course, over Zoom, if we are restricted to Zoom. And I have one ensemble that is restricted to Zoom. And then my other ensembles, even the ones that are face-to-face, when you're 6 feet apart and can hardly hear each other, and these college students, if they can't pile up on top of each other, they don't feel like they're connected. And so that social aspect has been the place where they've felt the weakest. There are some things that we did to help with that, and that will be something I try to augment and build upon in the spring. But that's something I had underestimated a little bit. I knew it was important. I knew it was my focus, but I underestimated just how important it would be and how difficult it would be to replace it. And so I'll give you a couple quick examples. One is that I find now that we've been in Zoom a little bit, as I spend a little bit of time with each student. You would have normally, as they come into your classroom, you would have normally spoken to each student, checked in on them, see how they're doing. It's the same kind of thing. It's an analog. Where are those other analogs for you? And so another one for us was we couldn't do a concert. Well, I thought to myself, well, this is just really dumb. Let's go ahead and sign out the auditorium anyway and put all the students in there, and we'll watch the stream of our concert, even though it's something that we had done beforehand. And I cannot tell you how glad I am that we did that. They cheered and clapped and had such a wonderful time watching their own concert. And it was such a moment of connection in a semester when morale was really low, and it brought them back up. I think they're finishing out the semester feeling really good about themselves and what they did, feeling much more connected. So moments like that can be really powerful if that's possible for you where you are. And then the last little bullet point that I put on here, the last thing that I really have to say today, and then Stephanie's going to wrap it up, is what if they still don't want what it is that I'm selling? And I think that's an important question that probably all of us have had to grapple with in one way or another this fall. In my community choir, like many community choirs, it's an older population for the most part. And they were not super excited about being on Zoom. They were not super excited about submitting recordings of themselves. That's about the last thing they want to do, is turn a camera on themselves and record. There's not a remedy for that I'm aware of. I've been thinking about it all semester, and I don't have a solution. It's been months and weeks now, and I still don't have a solution. What is the solution going to be? Well, I put down here at the bottom what I've been thinking about, and that is that do we or do we not think that music is essential? Do we or do we not think that it really fills a role in these people's lives? And if we do, then we've got to just keep working hard, and this moment will pass. And then those folks who were our supporters and who loved us and wanted to be in our choirs are gonna come back, many of them. And the ones that we're serving right now, in many cases, we're serving in a way we couldn't previously do. So for example, I have folks who are coming to me from states that are far away. I have a lady who's with me every Tuesday night from Bulgaria. We have people we're able to serve in a brand new way. Hopefully that will continue in some form or fashion, but also those folks are out there waiting in the wings for that moment when they can finally come back together and be in the same room. And we just have to keep the faith that we're going to make it to that point.
So just a couple of more interventions that you can try at home that are easy and applicable. So we know that positive psychology, the interventions for positive psychology are powerful. So gratitude journaling, just ending the day by listing some things that went well for you, 3 to 5 things that you're grateful for. But it matters that you're specific about the 3 to 5 things that you're grateful for, and it matters that you're original. So if you say every single night, I'm grateful for my family, having a roof over my head. Like if you say the same things, then you're going to just sort of turn it into something that's a routine and another chore for you to do. About 6 weeks of regular practice, we've seen reductions in both depressive and anxiety symptoms. And we know that depression and anxiety are on the rise right now. And so these are some small things that we can do just on our own, that you don't have to have a counselor helping you with. A gratitude letter. I tell this story sometimes. I incorporated the gratitude letter as what I call an alternative assignment. So I don't offer extra credit, but I offer alternative assignments. So if somebody misses something, they can make up points by doing something extra. So the alternative assignment is to write, the gratitude letter is to write a letter to somebody who's meant something to you or who's changed the course of your life in some way. And then you don't only just write the letter, you make an appointment and you read them the letter. And that's awkward, and it requires vulnerability, and you have to open yourself up to them. You have to sort of lay it all out there. It's very raw. But I have had such consistent positive reactions to that I incorporated it as a regular activity in my classes and assignment that I require. I've had people who've reconciled with estranged family members and who've had incredibly positive experiences, because if you do this, if you create this opportunity for vulnerability, the research indicates that it's a win-win. you leave feeling better, and the person that you've thanked for the way that they've changed your life feels wonderful. And so I have my students reflect on that process as well, and it's been a win-win all around. Let's see.
Sorry. I clicked one too
Going
far.
backwards.
I know. Okay.
All right. So in order to get help on the journey, if you do need help, the best predictor, I always tell my clients this, and I tell people this all the time, the very best predictor for positive therapeutic outcomes, if you do seek therapy, if you're reaching out to somebody, is the quality of the relationship between the therapist and the client. Research has borne it out time and time again. And in fact, I just had a presentation yesterday on how important the therapeutic alliance is. So if you don't feel like you're connecting with the person that you're trying to work with, then find a better fit, right? The therapeutic alliance is key. How do you find a good counselor? That's a question that I receive a lot. State organizations typically have provider directories. So your Texas Psychological Association, Texas Counseling Association, where we are. And then insurance companies also can provide referrals for providers who are in network with your insurance. So the thing that we want to close with is that the good life is a process. It's not a state of being. It's a direction. It's not a destination. And this comes from a humanistic provider named Carl Rogers, that we're always in a state of becoming.
And for my own part, I think the one thing I want to tell myself in terms of self-care is the same thing I want to tell my students, which is that this battle we're fighting today and this week and this month is not the last battle we'll ever fight. That this next month, this next semester, I always have to remind myself it's going to look very different. Sometimes I will pause and put myself in my body a month from now. You know, when I don't have 14 editing projects hanging over my head, when I don't have you know, all of the grading that I've got to do. That's going to come. It will get here, and so just to take each day as it comes and be ready for a change, because it will certainly get here. We also have a list of resources here at the end. These are mostly from Stephanie, so I think I'll let her outline which ones are most important to her.
Yeah, so if you're interested in reading up more on self-care and you want to learn a little bit more about some of the concepts that we've talked about, Kristen Neff is the originator for mindful self-compassion. She actually has a website, so you can Google her and you can find her website. She has TED Talks and talks about how to be compassionate with yourself. So and that sort of constant monologue that you have going in your head, adopt a posture of a wise best friend instead of a harsh critic. So we didn't have time to really jump into that literature, but it's an amazing body of literature. So I would encourage you to look into that. Rick Hansen has a book, Just One Thing. Those are some activities you can do. Daring Greatly by Brene Brown talks about vulnerability and relationship building. And then When by Daniel Pink, the slide that we skipped about timing, looks at how to structure your life in such a way that you're working with your sort of natural circadian rhythms for sleepiness and wakefulness.
The only thing I would add to that is one of the things that kept coming to mind over and over again as we're going through this presentation is a presentation I just saw with Carrie Adams from Florida State University via Coramore.com. And Coramore, that's going to be going up. And so if you're like me, one of the things that will de-stress you faster than anything is a solution for a problem that you're facing in your classroom, because that's what typically keeps me stressed. And so I would strongly encourage you to go check out Carrie's presentation once that's up in the next week or so. We had a wonderful presentation from one Caron Daley as well that's up there. There are lots of resources there. They're all free. There's no need to sign up or anything like that. But that came to mind a few times because some of what she talked about, Carrie that is, was ways to connect with your students at a time when we're mostly on Zoom. We have some who are asynchronous, which is very, very challenging. We have classrooms that are mixed between students who are on Zoom and who are live in front of us. And so she talked about some of the things that can help make that a more meaningful and impactful experience. And so I would encourage you to go check that out once it's up here in the next week or two.
Well, thank you so much, Troy and Stephanie. This has been like wildly enlightening on many different, from many different angles, actually. I feel like I learned a lot of different things in this presentation. Thank you. We're going to open up for some time of questions now, and I'm hopeful that please feel free to chat them to us, or actually, that is the way to do it. Pardon me, we're in a webinar. Please chat us the question. And I'll start with a question. I was hoping that you might touch on Core More even more with us, Troy, because for me this summer, I joined Core More, maybe I'm going to guess April or May. And I found it really positive and supportive to be amongst a consortium of choral directors, kind of, muddling through and thinking about ideas and solutions. Could you speak to what you've observed or heard about the impact of choral directors coming together and creating sort of communities of learning with one another?
Yes. Well, so first I would say that you mentioned the positive aspect of coming together. We had weekly meetings rather, of just, hey, let's get together and chat, all through the spring and the summer, and then those have now become monthly meetings. Of course, everybody's very busy, so that's less and less the case. But that community has sort of hung on together, and the nice thing about it is that it's a place where folks can sort of feel a little bit of a sense that I'm not the only one going through this. So I would encourage you. We don't have very many folks who are here today necessarily because everybody's still in the thick of it. But as these conference opportunities come up, even though they are online, it is such a great opportunity to reconnect with some of your colleagues. The Zoom chat is an amazingly supportive place to be. I've attended several virtual conferences at this point, and I see folks, old friends who are reconnecting, and oh yeah, that's a person I love, and I need to ask them questions about how their semester is going. I would also say that just again, Core More is totally free, no membership or anything like that, and it does there is something really therapeutic also about seeing, like, oh gosh, I'm not the first person to have thought about this, and here is a potential solution. One of the things that I was concerned about before we did the presentation was if this would feel like 1,000 prescriptions for one problem and then seem super overwhelming. And so I hope that folks will also take time maybe to finish out the semester and then take another gander at some of these resources, because having a moment to breathe before you start trying to improve yourself, I think, is also super important.
I would add to that, Troy. So one of the things that I talk to my students about or my clients about is when we start a behavior modification plan, it's really important to consider timing. So, I would have students come in maybe 1 or 2 weeks before the end of the semester, when I was working in the college counseling center, ready to quit smoking. They want to quit smoking, and making that decision is really important for your health. But making that decision right at the very end of the semester, when you have 6 papers and 4 final exams that are paper pencil that you have to do that are comprehensive, maybe that's not the right time. It's not the right time to set yourself up for success anyway. So if you want to set yourself up for success and you want to have those early gains, considering the timing is actually really, really important.
Yeah, we're at a time of the semester where fatigue has just really set in for people, and I'm just like amazed at how can I wake up every single morning and be tired. And so, Stephanie, I wondered if you, this is another question from me, but I wondered if you would just give us a couple hints on what are some of the psychological effects of crisis, and what are some of the psychological effects of long-term change or long-term instability?
Yeah. So there's some really good research on this. So APA, American Psychological Association, again, has done a Stress in America survey. So they've been looking at stress in the United States since the beginning of 2020 all the way through. And so looking at the impact of this chronic upheaval and tumult and difficulty. And so there's really good data there. So if you're a data person and you like the data, that would be a great place to go get it. But what we know is that stress creates what we would call a cortisol dump in our brain, right? So you have this fight or flight response. Your sympathetic nervous system takes over whenever you encounter a stressful situation. And then in the past, evolutionarily, it's made a lot of sense, right? If there was a saber-toothed tiger chasing you, you needed to have that burst of energy in order to run away or to turn and fight it, right? To be able to have the energy to flee. Our brains don't differentiate between mortal threats and other threats, right? And so what we know is that we have this cortisol, this stress hormone, that is released in response to stressful situations. And what we have seen over the course of 2020 has been stressful situation after stressful situation. And in fact, one of the things that we're seeing is sort of a mortal peril situation, right? In terms of a pandemic. And so that creates stress on the body, right? Oxidative stress, that hormone circulating through your blood system, it can create stress on your heart, stress sort of in your the way that your body functions. And so we're seeing a lot of that. So the key in this situation is to incorporate strategies that engage your parasympathetic nervous system. So your parasympathetic nervous system is what calms your body down and reestablishes sort of normalcy, right? So we're trying to return to neutrality. And we can do things to actively re-engage our parasympathetic nervous system. So mindfulness breaks, those practices of stillness are incredibly important for creating that system of normalcy again, reintroducing the parasympathetic nervous system. If you're experiencing something like panic symptoms or high levels of anxiety, structured breathing activities can help engage your parasympathetic nervous system too. So one of the things that I talk about is 4 square breathing, right? So you breathe in for 4, you hold for 4, you breathe out for 4, and you wait for 4, right? It's just an easy model that I show little kids that can also help to calm our bodies down. I also teach kids how to do bubble breaths, right? How to breathe out like you're going to blow bubbles. And as choral directors, I know you all know all about the breathing, but if we intentionally engage that, that can calm our parasympathetic nervous system as well, or engage our parasympathetic nervous system.
Thank you. That was really helpful. And so much of what we've learned from you today has been really three-dimensional and really comprehensive. And so I know that many of our viewers will look at this over the holidays when perhaps they have an extra moment or two. And I know that many of us are looking forward to that time. But I just want to thank you both again. This has been extremely informative and also positive. So thank you, because there are a lot of opportunities to be negative these days. And I think it's been nice to have this infusion of positivity from you. I'll just move over to another topic here to say that we have an event coming up in January, a small commercial here for our January 9th event, which is called January Jumpstart. And to your point about timing, Stephanie, we're hoping that this will be a good time for people to maybe get a little bit of a little boost for the second semester. So I hope that you will join us, everyone, Saturday, January 9th. And now I see a couple questions have just popped in. Ooh. Could we type in the chat the choral resource that Troy and Caron were referring to? There we go. Cora Moore, fantastic. Just one quick question here from Sean. Sean says, this probably pulls in a lot of what we've discussed, but frequently colleagues have discussed how much harder they feel like they're working to make things feel as normal as possible in this hybrid or virtual setting. Unfortunately, there seems to be a high amount of disengagement from students and singers. Would you recommend maybe one strategy to assist directors in keeping up the fight?
So this was precisely what Carrie was presenting on, and so that's what I mentioned there, Sean. So I will, that it's not up yet. I'll get that up this week. But she gave a talk via Cora Moore, and so it'll be there just in time for you to see for the spring semester. And she mentioned a lot of strategies centered around. I don't know. Is your state in Zoom only at the moment, or a mix of things, or?
It really depends where you are in Pennsylvania.
Okay. So in Texas, yeah, it's absolutely the case that we have people who are fully in person. We have schools that are shutting down and going to Zoom only at the moment because, of course, cases are on the rise. But what you're citing, Sean, is I think everyone's experience, which is that we are used to having our students right in front of us. If they're struggling, those 9th grade boys, we gather them right up around the piano, and we can get right up in their face and have a moment together. And that's just not possible via Zoom. Many of them have their cameras off. We can't even see whether they're paying attention or not, and we're just losing them. So I guess the first thing I would say, Sean, is that you're not alone in this experience, that many of us are working very hard and struggling with our students. I would say also that we do have some strategies for connection, such as spending time in an activity separate from music, to do something that is going to get those students on a different wavelength than they're in for the rest of their day. Many of us know that that sort of change in energy is necessary as they come into the choir hall in the first place. Well, same thing is true if they're on Zoom. They need a change in energy. They need a change in engagement. So just to think of an example, one of the things Carrie mentioned was to be very intentional about calling on a student to do something by name instead of just sort of sending out a message to the void and hoping for the, for the best. Because as a frequent Zoom presenter, whether to my students or anyone at all, I feel like I hear the crickets every time I ask a question. And so being intentional about engaging individuals. Another thing that I've done recently is I've taken to playing music every single time we begin anything that's over Zoom, and that helps to set an atmosphere of something pleasant. You know, it's a positive sort of way to enter the room, something that appeals to the students. So that's just two quick strategies. But in terms of I know we're out of time, but in terms of the amount of work that you're doing, this is kind of what we were referring to earlier, finding a sustainable way to work. What we're doing right now represents a major change, and so it is going to get easier, but you may also have to say, the thing that I did formerly for my students is just too high of an expectation right now. I need to adjust, and where are those points of potential adjustment that you can make?
Thank you, Troy. Well, thanks again to Troy and Stephanie for giving us encouragement and permission and ideas. And I know that a lot of folks are going to watch this after the fact, and I think I'm going to ask some people to watch it. It was so good. So
Well, thank you, Karen, for having us.
thanks
Thank you very
again. And
much.
thanks for joining us, everybody. Have a great
Bye,
weekend.
everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye.